Content warning. The following video is purely fictional and should not be taken as fact. Viewer discretion is advised, as it may contain disturbing imagery or themes that could be unsettling or triggering to some audiences. This content may not be suitable for all ages. Watch at your own risk. The wind howled through the jagged peaks of the Black Hollow Mountains as 5 hikers, Mark, Jess, Alex, Ben, and Olivia, trekked along a narrow, winding trail. They had started their journey early in the morning, eager to conquer the infamous Devil's Spine, a remote and rugged trail known for both its breathtaking views and eerie folklore. Before setting out, they had stopped at a small gas station at the base of the mountains, where an old man with sunken eyes and a voice like dried leaves had warned them. "You folks best be careful up there," he had said, leaning across the counter. "There's things in those woods that ain't natural. Sometimes you hear voices calling your name, and sometimes you see something that looks like someone you know, but ain't. If you do, keep walking. Don't listen. Don't stop." The group had laughed nervously, brushing off his words as nothing more than backwoods superstition. But as they hiked higher, the thick canopy of gnarled trees cast unnatural shadows, and the eerie silence of the forest seemed to press in on them. By nightfall, they set up camp near a small clearing. The air was unnaturally still. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just silence. Then, sometime past midnight, Olivia sat up with a sharp gasp. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. A voice, soft, distant, yet unmistakably familiar, called her name from the darkness. "Olivia." It sounded like Mark, but Mark was asleep in his tent. She clamped a hand over her mouth, her heart hammering in her chest. The others stirred, their breath visible in the cold air. Then came another sound, the crunch of footsteps circling their camp, too light for a bear, too deliberate for a lost hiker. Mark unzipped his tent and peered out, his flashlight sweeping across the trees. For a brief moment, the beam landed on something. A figure. It looked like Alex. Same clothes, same height, but its head twitched unnaturally, the way an insect moves. "Alex." Mark's voice wavered. Then Alex's voice came from behind him. "What?" Mark turned back, but the figure in the woods was gone. Panic set in. The group grabbed their gear and ran, their breaths ragged as they plunged blindly through the dark forest. But the thing was not far behind. They could hear it mimicking their voices, calling to them, luring them off the trail. One by one they disappeared. Olivia's lungs burned as she sprinted through the dense forest, barely able to see through the dark. The sound of her friend's frantic footsteps faded behind her. Then, a voice. "Sweetheart, stop running. You're going the wrong way." Her breath caught in her throat. "Mom?" A figure stepped out from the trees, a tall, thin woman, her face hidden in the shadows. Olivia's heart pounded. Her mother had been dead for years. "Come here, sweetheart," the woman whispered, her voice calm and inviting. Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. She took a hesitant step forward. Then the woman moved, too fast, too smooth. In a blink she was inches away, her face fully visible in the moonlight. It was her mother's face, but wrong. The eyes were too large, the mouth stretched too wide. Her skin rippled like something beneath it was shifting. Before Olivia could scream, clawed hands wrapped around her throat. Her body thrashed as the thing lifted her off the ground with inhuman strength. Its fingers dug into her skin as it pulled her closer, its mouth unhinging like a snake's. With a sickening crunch, it bit into her throat, silencing her before she could call for help. Blood gushed down her chest and her vision blurred. The thing held her until her struggling stopped. Then it released her limp body, letting it crumple to the ground. For a moment, the creature stood over Olivia's corpse. Then its body shuddered and twisted, bones snapping and reshaping, muscles stretching. When it stood straight again, it looked exactly like Olivia. It smiled, wiped the blood from its mouth, and walked into the forest. It had found its next victim. Ben ran alongside Alex, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The woods were an endless maze of twisted trees, and no matter which way they turned, they felt watched. Then, from behind them, Ben! Alex, it's me, Olivia, stop! Ben skidded to a halt. Olivia! Alex yanked his arm. No, keep moving. But Ben hesitated. From the darkness, Olivia stepped into view, her face pale, her breathing heavy. We need to stick together, she pleaded, looking between them. Where's Jess and Mark? Alex shook his head, his instincts screaming at him. That's not Olivia. Ben turned to argue, but then, where's Jess and Mark? The voice glitched. The exact same words, the exact same tone, like a recording. Ben's blood ran cold. The thing that looked like Olivia smiled, then lunged, its hands wrapped around Ben's face, slamming him into a tree. A sharp crack echoed through the forest. Ben's body twitched violently as his skull split against the bark. Blood streamed down his face. He gasped, his vision flickering. The creature loomed over him, its face no longer Olivia's. Its skin rippled, and a long, gaping maw stretched open. Ben tried to scream, but the thing clamped its mouth over his, sucking the air from his lungs. His chest spasmed as he suffocated. Then the creature bit down, tearing out his tongue and lower jaw in one grotesque motion. Blood sprayed across the leaves. Ben collapsed. The creature shuddered, its body morphing once more. Now it was Ben. It licked the blood from its lips and turned toward Alex. It was still hungry. Alex had seen what happened. He didn't wait. He ran. The forest blurred around him as his heart pounded in his ears. Get to the road. Get to safety. Then, ahead, Ben stepped into view. Alex, he panted. We have to keep moving. Alex slowed, shaking his head violently. He had just seen Ben die. What's my sister's name? Alex demanded. Ben blinked. Then he smiled. Alex turned to run, but the thing was already on him. Its arms coiled around his torso like a snake, pulling him to the ground. Its claws ripped into his stomach, peeling skin away. Alex screamed, but the thing shoved a hand down his throat, muffling his cries. It took its time pulling out his insides, savoring each gasp, each struggle. By the time it finished, Alex's body was just a husk in the dirt. The thing stood up, wiping the blood from its new face. Now, it was Alex. Mark had no idea how many of his friends were still alive. Then he heard Alex's voice behind him. Mark, we need to go. I saw the road up ahead. Mark hesitated. What's my sister's name? He whispered. Alex didn't answer. Then he grinned. Mark bolted, but Alex was faster. The thing tackled him, slamming him into the dirt. It leaned down, its forehead pressing against his. I don't need you anymore. Then it peeled his face off. Jess was the last one standing. He stumbled onto an old fire road, gasping for air. A shadow moved behind him. Before he could scream, long, clawed fingers clamped over his mouth. The last thing he heard was his own voice whispering, Don't stop. 2 days after the hikers went missing, Park Ranger Daniel Adams was sent to investigate. He had been working in Black Hollow for nearly a decade, and though he had heard the stories, tales of skinwalkers, shapeshifters, and the things in the woods that mimic voices, he never put much stock in them. Bears, cougars, and the occasional crazed hermit were the worst things he had encountered. That was about to change. The hikers' campsite was a war zone. Shredded tents, gear scattered in every direction, blood, too much blood, spattered across the trees and soaked into the dirt. And yet, there were no bodies. Adams felt the weight of the forest pressing in around him. The woods were unnervingly silent. No birds, no insects. Then he heard it. Adams. A whisper. His breath caught in his throat. He spun, his flashlight darting across the trees. Adams, help me. It was Jess's voice. He knew it was impossible. The hikers had been missing for 2 days, and this voice sounded fresh, like she had just wandered off the trail. Then something moved. A figure stood at the edge of the trees, a young woman, barely visible in the dim light. Jesus Christ, Adams muttered, stepping closer. Jess? The woman took a slow, unnatural step forward. Adams lifted his flashlight and froze. It looked like Jess, but something was wrong. Her face was stretched too tight, her limbs slightly too long, her joints bending at angles they shouldn't. Her lips didn't move when she spoke, but her voice still came, echoing, distorted, like a radio signal from deep underwater. Adams, help me. His gut twisted. This was not Jess. Then it screamed, an unholy gut-wrenching sound that shattered the silence of the forest. It was not human, a sound like a woman wailing, a bear roaring, and something else entirely, a deep, guttural clicking that seemed to rattle inside his skull. Adams stumbled backward, drawing his gun. His hands trembled as he leveled it at the thing wearing Jess's skin. The creature lunged. Adams fired. The shot rang through the trees, and the thing twisted unnaturally, dodging the bullet with inhuman speed. It sounded like all 5 hikers at once. The air grew colder. Shadows seemed to stretch around him, closing in. He did the only thing he could. He ran. Adams sprinted through the dark, lungs burning, his boots pounding against the dirt trail. The thing followed, its distorted voice calling after him, sometimes Jess, sometimes Ben, sometimes his own voice. Then came another scream, closer this time, louder, more ear-splitting than before. Adams felt something just behind him, its breath on his neck. His truck was in sight. With the last ounce of strength he had, he lunged for the door, ripping it open and throwing himself inside. The thing was right outside his window. For the first time, it dropped the disguise. It stood on 2 legs, but was wrong in every way. Gaunt, stretched too tall, its skin mottled and sickly. Its face was a grotesque amalgamation of the hikers, their features flickering across its skull like a slideshow. It slammed a clawed hand against the window, leaving a smear of blood that was not its own. Adams gunned the engine. The headlights illuminated the thing's true face for just a second. Then it let out one final scream, so loud and ear-piercing that Adams felt blood trickle from his nose, before melting into the forest. The last thing he saw before speeding away was the torn remnants of his own badge lying in the dirt. By the time Adams reached the station, his hands were shaking so badly that he nearly dropped his keys. He barged through the door, gasping for breath. But something was wrong. Inside, standing by his desk, were 3 men in black suits. Federal agents. Adams blinked. Who the hell are... You were investigating the hikers, one of them interrupted, his voice cold, emotionless. Tell us what you saw. Adams wiped sweat from his brow, still catching his breath. Something in the woods. It wasn't human. It mimicked their voices, their faces. It was a bear, the agent interrupted. Adams frowned. The hell it was. That wasn't a damn bear. The agent's expression didn't change. He took a slow step forward. It was a bear, he repeated. His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it. Adams's stomach twisted. I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. The agent sighed, then reached into his jacket. For a horrifying second, Adams thought he was pulling a gun. Instead, the man slid a photo across the desk. Adams looked down. His family, his wife and daughter standing in their front yard, smiling at the camera. Adams' throat went dry. We trust you won't say anything different, the agent said smoothly, as you wouldn't want anything to happen to your family. Silence. Adams felt his heart pounding. For the first time that night, he felt true fear. His jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists at his sides. Then, slowly, he nodded. The agents exchanged a glance. The man who had spoken gave him one final nod before picking up the photo and tucking it away. Good. Then, just as quickly as they had arrived, the agents left. Adams stood in the empty ranger station, his breath coming in short gasps. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, and somewhere, deep in the woods, something laughed. It was still out there, and now no one would ever know. Because it was a bear, and nothing else.